Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the program. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. Yesterday, we concluded in about the middle of the page 31, if you're following along in your online copy, and maybe you're so fortunate as to have a hard copy of this book, and much thanks to my listener who helped me out in that regard, and now I hold in my hands a hard copy of this book, and I'm very pleased to have it blessed, and it will be a great addition to my library. But we'll avail ourselves of the invaluable information that James A. Wiley includes in this book. And he's talking currently about the time when all of Europe, Roman Catholic countries and Protestant countries alike, forbid the papacy to issue bulls and papal encyclicals and pastoral letters and every other kind of document within their countries. Look, it's easy for us to understand what's taken place. The governments of Europe, both Protestant and Catholic, were sick and tired of the Pope trying to take control of the government. How could any government, whether in a Catholic country or in a Protestant country, maintain any order in the country if the Pope could arbitrarily and at his own whim command the people to rebel against the government? It was an unworkable system. And all the kings of Europe, even those devout to the Pope, rejected the Pope's ability to just come in and run roughshod over the government and command the people to rebel against the government. All the nations wanted to work out their internal problems internally. Now, it's easy for us to understand in the United States of America how put off we would be if some Muslim imam from some Muslim country in the Middle East, some Saudi Arabian king, would begin to issue rescripts, orders of the Muslim people in this country to resist the government, the lawful government of this country. I mean, the people of the United States would be, ready to go to war, wouldn't they? This would be regarded as treason. And even if our government began to bend the knee to some Saudi Arabian king, we would probably oust that president, wouldn't we? Some way or another? Nations, by their very definition, demand sovereignty to work out their own problems. I mean, after all, nobody understands their problems better than they do, right? No pope or any potentate from a foreign institution or a foreign government could understand the problems of every individual nation better than the people that live within that nation. And nobody could come up with a better solution for their problems than those people, right? Common sense. Just common sense. There's nothing mystical or hard to understand about this. And all of Europe rebelled against the temporal power of the Pope. Even the Roman Catholic countries. Now, Great Britain, just like every other country, passed laws under Protestant Queen Elizabeth prohibiting the introduction of letters apostolic from Rome. Just absolutely wouldn't allow them to be published in the country. They shut out the Pope. Now, of course, I regard him as the Antichrist, and that's how we should all regard him, the Antichrist of the Bible. But whether you're Catholic or Protestant, you can understand why the governments of the world naturally resisted any interference from the papacy. Great Britain was one of them. Now, at the time of the writing of this book, some of those laws that prohibited the Pope from communicating with Roman Catholics in the country were being repealed. Okay? The papacy was given room to dictate laws to Roman Catholics in Great Britain. And this was undermining the authority of the legitimate government. The Protestant government, which cared most about maintaining liberty both for Protestants and for Catholics. Catholics do not appreciate the iron boot of Rome messing in their domestic affairs. But the Pope insists that as the vicar or the replacement of the Son of God on earth, he has jurisdiction everywhere. And in nowhere is he to be shut out. And that goes for Protestant countries just as well as Roman Catholic countries. The man of sin will not be shut out. He's as persistent as Satan would be in every individual life. He will not be shut out. Okay? He will never cease to try to conquer the world and to overthrow the legitimate government of Christ on the earth. So in human form, the papacy, which is really the vicar of Satan, is with the same mindset, the same goal to be achieved, the overthrow of every rightful government and the establishment of himself as a global dictator. All right. I hope I've explained. Now, these laws are being abrogated, or rather repealed, in Protestant Great Britain. Now, he says, as regards the older statutes, in especial that of Richard II, government has declared that it will not now prosecute upon them, so that the abolition of these prohibitory enactments is virtually total. So, while these anti-papal laws are still on the books, those that have not yet been repealed, the government is just plain saying, well, we're going to leave them on the books, but we're not going to enforce them. In other words, the door has been thrown completely open to the Pope. He can issue his edicts. He can issue his excommunications. He can issue his papal bulls and encyclicals and pastoral letters, and we're not going to prosecute, even though the laws still remain on the books. Now, you can imagine what the Catholics in Britain are going to say. All right? It says, the papists said, that is, the Roman Catholics, or those who adhere to the authority of the Pope, quote, why do you keep these enactments on the statute book? They are a relic of the times of bigotry. They are a disgrace to you and an insult to us. We have no intention of doing what these statutes forbid. For your own credit, if not for your own sake, repeal them, unquote. Now, many people can imagine in their mind's eye that these are just, well, naive Roman Catholics, well-meaning as they may have been. They're simply using logic. Look, you've already repealed some of these quote-unquote ridiculous laws, these bigoted laws, and you've already as much as admitted we really don't need to have these sorts of laws in this country. We Roman Catholics live side by side with you Protestants in peace and prosperity. We have no designs to take over the government. These laws, what remain of them on the books, are a shame to you and an insult to us. Let's just clean the slate. If we really want peace between Roman Catholics and Protestants in this country, we can't have these bigoted laws on the books. They're a shame to you. They're a disgrace. Makes sense, doesn't it? And Great Britain bought it. They bought the logic. They forgot what Rome really stands for. That the papacy is just as determined to take over the government of Great Britain as Satan is to take over the kingdom of Christ. I mean, it can't be any other way. Or there's literally ceases to be an Antichrist in the world. And that's not going to happen until Christ returns. All of Britain had to do at this time was say, has Christ returned? Has the Antichrist been destroyed? Well, the obvious answer is no. And no matter how well-meaning, no matter how mild-mannered these Roman Catholics are, they were naive at best and duplicitous with the Pope at worst. There's one thing you can always take for granted. No matter how much logic, no matter how much mild speaking, no matter how conciliatory they appear, no matter how friendly, the papacy is the mortal enemy of Christ and the mortal enemies of those who worship Christ and Him alone. And he will use those Roman Catholics to achieve what he could not achieve any other way, even by the Spanish Armada, even by invasion, even by the gunpowder plot, even by the Babington plot or any other plot that Rome ever placed against Protestant Great Britain. The most subtle advances on the Protestant government came from these very logical and very seemingly trustworthy Roman Catholics. You've already admitted that your laws are a disgrace. You've repealed some of them. Now repeal them all. For the sake of peace. For the sake of Christian unity. Let's all be brethren in Christ Jesus. Take all those laws off the books. Do you now see the difference between, or the similarities between what is happening in Great Britain and Vatican Council II? That's exactly what happened. All right? Now, what do we get in the United States since Vatican Council II? What did we learn in the previous book we read, The Global Vatican? We have papal control. No Protestant control at all in the country anymore. It's papal control. And that's what Great Britain got, too. And we're going to continue, and you're going to see it for yourself. This is just ghastly what is happening in Great Britain at this time. Again, the papists say, why do you keep these enactments on the statute book? They're a relic of times of bigotry. They are a disgrace to you and an insult to us. We have no intention of doing what these statutes forbid. For your own credit, if not for our sake, repeal them, unquote. Now, James A. Wiley continues, he says, this reasoning prevailed. The gates of our country were open to import and to publish all and every edict from Rome. Okay? And in our case, not only has the Pope never been restricted from issuing his bulls and encyclicals and pastoral letters and every other cockamamie thing from the pit of hell in Rome, our government has invited the Pope, a Jesuit Pope to boot, to come and instruct our government. And no one seems to be alarmed. It's ghastly what's happening. He says, thus another great point was gained, a point indispensable for what was about to come after. That an eye in the Vatican was all the while watching this movement is evident from a conversation of Wiseman, Dr. Wiseman, with Pope Gregory XVI, recorded in his book entitled Four Last Popes, in which the pontiff refers to a certain obstacle in Great Britain which must be removed before an organized aggression could take place in that country. Now, what do you suppose that obstacle was? The Protestant crown. The Protestants in Parliament. The coronation oath that demanded that the monarch be Protestant and uphold the Protestant faith. That these laws that were established under Protestant Queen Elizabeth had to be all repealed and removed from the books so that the doors might be completely open for papal takeover. That's what Rome insisted must take place in Great Britain. That Great Britain must return to the authority of the papacy. That Great Britain must be restored as a temporal jurisdiction of the Pope. It's an overthrow of the government, complete overthrow of the government. That's what Rome insists. Now that obstacle was now out of the way, says Wiley, and speedily came the denouement. That is, the plot has been revealed. The papal aggression of 1850. All right, now all eyes are beholding what has resulted from negotiating with the papists in Great Britain. The papacy is going to command control of the government of Great Britain. It says that aggression was the fair and full launching of the whole scheme. It exhibited the complete machinery of Rome set up in our country, openly and avowedly, from the red cardinal to the barefoot monk. By these wary and well-weighed steps did the Church of Rome steadily advance to her crowning measure. Now, we're going to discover what that crowning measure was and how it took place. The next portion of the book is entitled The Edict from the Flaminian Gate. And the Flaminian Gate is a reference to the Vatican. All right? The Edict from the Vatican. The Edict from the Pope. He continues, he says, in 1850, Cardinal Wiseman, arriving from Rome, published in England an edict from the Flaminian Gate. Okay? He published an edict from the Pope. I mean, after all, the doors are open now. The Pope can write whatever he wants, and the Cardinal can bring them to Great Britain and publish them. It says the form of the deed was imperial. That means having to do with an empire, right? The form of the deed, in other words, the edict from the Flaminian Gate, the issuance from the Vatican to Great Britain, came in the form of an imperial edict. It was a kingly edict. I mean, after all, when England said, we'll repeal these laws, they simply set their own queen aside, their own government aside, and allowed the Pope to just step in and take over. And that's exactly what he did. He said the form of the deed, this edict from Rome, was imperial. And its import was not less imperial than its form. Okay, it came in the form of an imperial edict from the hierarch in Rome, and its contents was imperial in nature. It didn't just look imperial, it was imperial in substance. And he says, by the same formality did old Rome, that's a reference to the old Roman Empire that had been overthrown at the Protestant Reformation. He says, by the same formality did old Rome signify to the countries which her jurisdiction, which her legions had overrun, that they had passed under her yoke and were become part of her empire. Okay? In a day, England switched from a democratic country ruled over by a queen and a parliament to a papal fiefdom. In a day. The Pope just plainly announced, England has been restored to my papal jurisdiction. That's what happened. Just that easy. He says, by the same formality did old Rome signify to the countries which her legions had overrun that they had passed under her yoke. In other words, the yoke of Rome had now been placed upon the people. And now they had become part of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire of the Pope. It's just an announcement of a new government. Just that simple. The Pope issued his decree that England was his. And it says, adopting the style of the haughty mistress of the old world, and yet haughtier mistress of the new, told England that she had been taken back into the empire of Catholicism and was henceforward to hold herself the subject of the pontifical see. From henceforth, former Protestant Great Britain is now Roman Catholic. It has a new government. The Pope is that government, and the nation is Roman Catholic. Just like that. It's now Roman Catholic. It's part of the Roman Empire, headed up by the Pope. And it says the edict joined Great Britain to the 7 hills. Okay? The 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And it says such was held to be its legal import. I mean, after all, if the Pope is the God of this world, and he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he is the penultimate lawmaker, anything that he says has the import of law, doesn't it? And that's how it was to be taken. It has the force of law. Every rescript from the Pope has the force of law. That's what the Pope says. That's what the kings of the earth believe. And we're under their authority. So logic dictates that the civil laws of the land must conform to the Pope's order of things. The papal law, the Roman Catholic canon law. And that's what was set in motion in Britain at this time. Complete and total Romanization of Great Britain, formerly Protestant. He says, such was held to be its legal import. All law, authority, and rule in the country opposed to that of Rome, or not holding to it, in other words, not obeying it, was virtually abrogated, done away with, although meanwhile suffered to exist. Okay? What he's saying is, from this point forward, the Pope is the government du jour of England, and the former Protestant government, though it's still seated, they haven't yet voluntarily abandoned their post. The Queen hasn't taken off her crown and taken her place with the commoners of England. Even though that government is still in place, it has no force. It's a false government. No one's to obey it. No one's to give it any heed. The British royals are not to be obeyed. All law, authority, and rule in the country opposed to that of Rome, which any Protestant government would be, any Protestant law would be opposed to Roman Catholic canon law and the Pope, our not holding of it was virtually abrogated, although meanwhile suffered to exist. The only valid authority in Great Britain in the eyes of Romanists henceforward was the Vatican. That's real history. 1850 in England, at the time of Pope Pius IX, the very same Pope who was declared infallible and issued his syllabus of error to the nations of the world. We'll be right back after the message. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
years ahead of the dominant media. FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. If you'd like to support the program, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors it. Thanks to Brother Nicholas, and we'll continue. If you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, you've seen, for all intents and purposes, at least from the papacy's point of view, that in a day England became Catholic, that the government was replaced. The Protestant government was replaced. That heretical Protestant government was replaced with the Pope. Now it's time for the Pope to set up his hierarchy in the nation and just redivide the land and appoint bishops as governors over their counties and do just like what has always been done in the United States of America. Yeah, that's right. This country is divided into papal jurisdictions. They're called dioceses and archdioceses. It is through the bishops and the archbishops that oversee these jurisdictions, these legal jurisdictions. This is the means whereby the Pope, the Antichrist of the Bible, commands his people. And at any time, they can, while they're overseers of the visible government in Washington, D.C., they are the true power. And at any time that Washington, D.C. begins to betray the Pope, these dioceses go into action. These bishoprics go into action. That's the shadow government. The Roman Catholic hierarchical structure, the government of the Pope, has been established in this country almost since the founding of the country. Now, the example we have here is that for somehow Great Britain had kind of loosened her grip on the idea that the Pope is the Antichrist. The greatest of all evils to be feared in any nation is the Pope. They forgot that. Or else they never would have repealed any of these laws that forbid the Pope to command his people and to raise rebellion against the government. The government of Great Britain abrogated those laws and said those that are still on the books we're simply not going to enforce. The Pope's free to come in and do whatever he wants. Now, no Protestant nation would in his right mind do such a thing. No kingdom of Christ would surrender jurisdiction to the Antichrist of the Bible. And this is exactly what Great Britain did. Now, you have to ask yourself, what happened in Great Britain? How did Great Britain lose their Protestant understanding? How did Protestant Great Britain just fling open her doors to the Antichrist? The enemy of Christ, the replacement of Christ, the one who deceives the whole world. What happened in Great Britain? Well, I can only conclude, and this is just me speaking, whether it's worth anything or not, but I can only conclude that since we know that futurism got its start in Great Britain, in Oxford and Cambridge, no less, that Britain was beginning to toy with the idea that the papacy is not the Antichrist. The whole history of the popes were not the Antichrist. The office of the papacy is not the Antichrist. It's a single individual that won't come until just before Christ's return. That's the only explanation I can give it. How in the world can a Protestant nation forget the very foundation of Protestantism and then open its doors lock, stock, and barrel to the papal government, to the rule of Antichrist? Futurism had already done a dastardly work in Great Britain, is the only conclusion to which I can come. And they began to tear down those anti-papal laws and virtually just handed their country over to Rome. As much as apologizing for ever calling the papacy the Antichrist. Now, if he's not the Antichrist, what is he? Logic dictates that if you no longer believe the papacy is the Antichrist of the Bible, what must he be? Well, he claims to be the vicar of Christ. He claims to be the leader of the Christian world. And we know he's got power. He can assemble the armies of the world and launch crusades and inquisitions. He can seat and unseat kings. He pretends to love Jesus Christ, so he must be a Christian. You see what happened in Great Britain? Now, what happened in the United States at Vatican Council II? The papacy simply said, you who we formerly called heretics, he was speaking to Protestants, we now call you separated brethren. Just separated brethren. You're not a heretic to be burned at the stake. We're calling you separated brethren. We're opening the door to you to come back to the Roman Catholic Church. Why? Well, because you believed in futurism. Well, therefore, if futurism, which says that the Antichrist is not the papacy, but one individual that comes just before Christ's return, well, then you've excused the Pope, and now you ought to come back to the Roman Catholic Church, just like England ought to abrogate and remove from the books all of its anti-papal laws. In the United States, we essentially did the same thing. We believed in futurism and then just threw the doors open to the Pope. We're sorry, Mr. Pope. Excuse me, I bumped my microphone. We're sorry, Mr. Pope. The Protestant Reformation was wrong. Martin Luther was wrong. All of them were wrong. We're sorry. And now we want peace and unity. Finally, peace and unity in the Christian world. Then we can fulfill our apostolic mission. And that's what happened at Vatican Council II. And then Vatican Council II was also this, an ultimatum. Now that you admit your mistake, now that you admit the Protestant reformers were wrong, now look at the consequences of the Protestant Reformation. All the governments of Europe were overthrown. The Pope no longer set the kings and the queens. He no longer dictated the policies of the nations. He could no longer issue his bulls and encyclicals. He could no longer forgive sins. He could no longer hear confessions. He was simply nothing in the world. And you took that all away on false pretenses. You took away the land, you took away the money, you took away the spiritual authority, you took away the temporal authority, you destroyed the papacy. Now you're going to restore it all at your own expense, your expense in treasure, your expense in blood, and your expense in guts, and you're going to do it till the whole world is conquered for the Pope. You've admitted a diabolical crime, a sin against the throne of Almighty God, which is the papacy, and you're going to restore to me all that you robbed from me at the Protestant Reformation, you former brethren. And now you are enslaved. And just like the Pope, after Rome threw away all of those anti-papal laws, set about immediately to reestablish the government under the authority of the Pope and to divide England up into jurisdictions for cardinals and archbishops and bishops to rule the country. Well, they did the same thing in the United States of America. They didn't get on television and trump their victory for everybody to hear, but you've been under Roman control ever since Vatican Council II, if not before then. The civil laws of this land are made to conform to Roman Catholic canon law. And this United States of America is no longer Protestant, it's Roman Catholic, and it's a global crusader for the Pope. And it is Protestant blood, Protestant sweat, Protestant guts, Protestant money and treasure. Every resource of this country is dedicated to conquering the rest of the world for the Pope. That's reality. And I defy you to describe what's happening in this country any other way. You can have nothing but confusion and conflict in your mind until you understand the papal control of this country, post-Vatican Council II. Both the left, the Democratic Party, and the right, the Republican Party, are just simply slaves for the Pope. They're working on the same agenda. The Republicans win victory for a while and have control. That means the Pope is in control. And when the people get tired of that tyranny, they vote for the Democrats. And the Democrats have control. And they write the laws of this country. And the Pope, through them, is still the judge of this land, the king of this land. Both the Democratic and Republican parties are just two sides of one papal coin. And as long as you think there is still legitimate conflict, a real difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, then you've bought the lie. You keep fueling the very mechanism that expands the papacy's control in this country and keeps the papal proxy wars going. If you depend one stitch upon the government of this country, the visible government of this country, you have accepted lock, stock, and barrel the invisible government that controls it. The Antichrist of the Bible. And despite its outward profession of Christianity, it is now anti-Christian. The government of the United States is anti-Christian. Now, does current events and not so recent history make sense? Just as the Pope demonstrated, when you throw the door open to the Pope, he walks in and takes over. That's what happened in 1850 in Great Britain, Protestant Great Britain. And that's exactly what happened in the United States at Vatican Council II. Now, just because you didn't hear this admission on Fox News and CNN and NBC and MSNBC and all the other papal liars doesn't make it any less a reality. And you cannot understand what's happening in this country until you can wrap your brain around what I'm describing to you. The greatest love that anyone can express for his brother man, his fellow brother, is to tell the truth, even if it makes you their enemy. I'm telling you the truth. It's verifiable truth. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It's just history revisited. The very thing that Rome did in England has already happened in the United States of America. And whenever you see those smiling faces, those platitudes, those flattering tongues on the news, presidential candidates, political candidates of every race, whether it be national politics, whether it be state politics, local politics, they're all lying to you. And if they told you the truth, you'd be ready to go to war by morning. This country would be destroyed by morning if they ever told you the truth and who they really work for. And that's how they soothe their conscience. They know they can't tell you the truth. They must lie. Because telling the truth would do more harm than good. They are compelled to lie to you. And they can call it duty, responsibility, preserving the republic. That's how they soothe their conscience. But what do they say to Christ? How can their lies slip through Christ's understanding and knowledge? They're going to be held responsible for lying to us, for allowing the Pope to take over our government and leave this government, just like they did in Great Britain. It suffered to exist. It stayed in place. The Queen of England still maintained her crown. Parliament met in session regularly without skipping a beat. It still looked like a Protestant nation. But they were all under papal control. And of course, they couldn't admit it to the people, or there'd have been war by morning. And they thought they were doing God's service, protecting Great Britain from imploding a great war. They thought they were doing God's service in preserving the papal lie. That's exactly what they're doing in this country. Exactly what they're doing in this country. I hope you understand. I hope you're getting a better understanding of what's happening in the United States of America through reading this book, Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. Now we're going to continue. The next portion of the chapter is entitled The Papal Aggression. How did this papal aggression take place? You're also going to find this very familiar. He says the first intimation given to the nation of the new Roman policy was in the tablet of October 5th and was to the following effect. Quote, "It appears now next to decided that Cardinal Wiseman will return to England for a short time and will hold a synod and establish the hierarchy." Unquote. So what had been decided in Rome, Cardinal Wiseman was going to implement as soon as he got back to England. He was going to establish the Roman Catholic hierarchy. That means he was going to divide England into archdioceses and dioceses, and he was going to appoint an archbishop and a bishop over those counties and begin to rule. Since the visible government had been literally set aside, it was no longer valid, even though it remained apparent. He says, quote, "It appears now next to decide." Remember, this is published in a magazine, the Tablet of October 5th. "It appears now next to decided that Cardinal Wiseman will return to England from Rome, obviously, for a short time and hold a synod and establish the hierarchy." Unquote. That's what it said in the magazine. He says this, of course, meant that the mask or the guise which the popish bishops in Britain had long worn as merely missionary bishops, or Melopotamus, or Trachonitis, or Limur, whatever they called themselves at the time, before the papal aggression, would be thrown off, and the Romish territorial sees established in the country. They're going to divide up the territory. They're going to establish Roman hierarchs over all of Great Britain. Okay, the invisible government that previously existed was now going to be the visible government. And it says, we next learned in the Gazette de Roma, the Roman Gazette, that on the 30th of September, a consistory was held in the Vatican, that a cardinal's hat was bestowed upon Dr. Wiseman. Yeah, they elevated him to cardinal. After all, he single-handedly conquered all of Protestant Great Britain. He ought to be endowed with the papal scarlet, shouldn't he? You know, if you ever lay your eyes on a cardinal, someone who's been elevated to the rank of cardinal in the papal hierarchy, you are looking at a world-class criminal. What they have to do to earn a cardinal's hat is unspeakable. And here's what this cardinal did. He conquered Great Britain. He helped the Jesuits take over Ireland and take over even the Protestant seminaries and colleges in England. He simply prepared all of the British realms for papal control. He's a world-class criminal. He lied to the people of Britain. He lied to the Parliament. He lied to the Crown. We're just plain Roman Catholic Christians just like you. Well, we don't have any intent to take over the government, and your laws are a shame to you and an embarrassment to us. Why don't you take those laws off the books? And as soon as you do, we're going to smack you right between the eyes with papal control. And that's exactly what they did, and he got by with it. They elevated him to cardinal status. Now, whenever you see a cardinal in this country, you are looking at a diabolical enemy of Christ, or they would never wear the papal hat, the cardinal's hat. He says, we next learned from the Gazette de Roma, the Roman Gazette, that on the 30th of September, a consistory was held in the Vatican. Of course, the British people didn't know anything about it. That a cardinal's hat was bestowed upon Dr. Wiseman, that the city of Westminster was erected into an archbishopric. Okay? There's your first archbishopric in Protestant Great Britain, Westminster. And placed under the new cardinal. That is, Westminster, the jurisdiction known as Westminster in England, was now ruled by that cardinal, Dr. Wiseman, Roman Catholic cardinal. And he was appointed to govern the kingdom with the aid of 12 suffragans, 12 assistants, bishops, among whom England was distributed into territorial dioceses. Okay? So Cardinal Wiseman took over Westminster, and then he divided all the rest of England into territories called dioceses, and he put his 12 suffragans each over his own diocese. This is how Rome establishes the hierarchy. This is how Rome establishes the new government. When the old government has, well, laid down its jurisdictions, as did the Protestants of Great Britain. See what happens when you no longer believe that the papacy is the Antichrist? He proves immediately that he is. Okay? England was divided into territorial dioceses. What is a diocese, class? Everybody in unison says, why, a territorial jurisdiction for papal rule. That's what a diocese is. He says an entire change had been decreed upon the Popish Church in Great Britain. What does that mean? The lawful government of England has literally been set aside. You now have a new king, and he's your rightful king. You who call yourselves Roman Catholics are now under your rightful king, the Pope. He says the selection of Westminster as the seat of the government of the new cardinal had an arrogant and offensive look, to say the least, right? Westminster is the spot of all others most associated with the glories of our past history. Right? They strategically chose Westminster because it meant so much to sovereign Great Britain. Rome took over the most historically significant spot in all of Great Britain to issue their first archbishopric. So what does that message send to Great Britons? To Britons? The papacy doesn't give a whit about your history, your sovereignty, what you value in the land. It's all dung when it is replaced by the papal king. It was purposely chosen to disassociate all of Great Britain from its history. All of Great Britain from its national loyalty. All of Great Britain from its sovereignty. Every appointment under this new government is purposeful to send a message that most people wouldn't even comprehend. Think what they've done to the United States of America without your knowledge, without your consent, against your true history, your sovereignty, and all. We'll be back tomorrow to continue our reading of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. Blessings, and I'll see you tomorrow.